police brutality thing in California? I just want to get your
Sure,
guys'
let's
take.
do it.
Like, it really bothers me that California, like, I bet you there's going to be states that are diverse in its Democratic and Republican composition, and some Republican states that passed comprehensive police reform, and California will be one of the laggards.
What do you think, if you could wave a magic wand, Chamath, what are the 1, 2, and 3 things? Take a minute to think it through, and everybody on the call can. What are the 1, 2, and 3 things you would do to change policing in the United States? I have my own list, but I'm curious what you guys think. And I actually put a tweet storm out about my number 1 thing. What are the specific tactical things? Let's get tactical first.
The first one that I've always been a big fan of, as I've studied it at least from 10,000 feet, is ending qualified immunity.
Explain why and what that is.
Qualified immunity is essentially that there is this immunity that certain individuals have, and that they're not subject to prosecution, and so they essentially have a carte blanche to behave in ways that can be good in some cases, very, very bad in other cases, gray in other cases, yet there's no adjudication of their behavior. And so you have to allow people with solid, dispassionate, detached judgment to be able to enter and say, hey, listen, you were way out of line here, and there are consequences for it. And people coming in doing those jobs need to understand those consequences versus you have a carte blanche to basically do whatever you want. And I think
let's talk specifically about the shooting involving, I won't say murder right now, because I think all the facts are not in, but Jacob Blake was shot in the back. He was obviously not listening to the police. The police then followed him to his car. There was a discussion of if there was a knife on the floorboard, and point blank, they shot him in the back multiple times. And I've heard both sides of this. This person is not listening to the police. This person is going into the car. They're reaching potentially for a weapon, and the cops had no choice. It seemed to me that, the training of a police officer might actually be that was a legitimate shooting. But that means maybe they have to rethink policing, because you could have easily taken that person down with even the most modest of a chokehold or a tackle. And when we see that, it feels like that's the Rorschach test right there of like how you look at shootings. In police. When you saw that shooting, I take it, Chamath, of Jacob Blake, and
I saw it, and I just like I can't see these anymore. They send me off the rails for days. But I did see it.
And so I mean, when you look at something like that, that's clearly training has to change, because I believe that based on police training and qualified immunity, this is going to be considered, even though it's shocking to see it. I think it's going to be considered an allowed shooting, or the person's not going to be prosecuted because the person was clearly not listening, and there was a knife on the floor and he was going for it. And, it seems to me like we really need to change the actual training. The average is 6 months of training. So I think that's one of the top things that has to change, is that these police officers have to be trained not to fire first, but to use other tactics.
So for me, the first one is that. The second one for me, which I'm a really big fan of, is that there needs to be a new way to actually intercept 911 calls. And instead of deploying police officers, we have a separate branch of people that we, massively pay and train, that are effectively, social workers plus. And
negotiators, yeah.
And they should be deployed in all kinds of situations, where I think that what people want is a de-escalation. And I think that sometimes the words de-escalation and police don't really sync up. And in a lot of people's minds, they think of escalation. So people who are trained to de-escalate, I think, and so, for example, all of the mental health checks, all of the mental health issues could probably be dealt with folks like this.
Domestic disturbances would probably go into that category.
The third one is I would very much rationalize drug use. Just because I think the amount of low-level offenses and arrests around drug use is antiquated for people's general views on drugs. And I think that it needs to sort of correlate to how society views it. And then, the last two that I would give you is that there's a concept of no-knock warrants. That's how Breonna Taylor was killed.
Insane.
It's kind of really scary, the idea that we could all be sitting in our houses right now as we are, and literally the police can just charge in. Is a little scary.
Totally unnecessarily. I mean, she was being for some like low level drug idea, they're going to knock the doors in, and of course, the person's going to try to protect themselves. That's the domain of the house. Sachs, what are your thoughts on?
They knocked the doors in, and they were plain clothes wearing police officers. So people are coming, and they did it at like midnight when she was asleep. So yeah, people busting into her house at midnight, screaming, making noise, and not dressed as cops. That's a
what do we
crazy
expect to
situation.
happen?
Yeah.
And then the last one I would give you is militarization of police. A lot of these ideas, by the way, are Justin Amash's ideas. I've retweeted and I followed, but he was the one that put me onto these things. But like you have all this excess military equipment in the army that gets basically passed through and now directly sold into police departments.
Yeah, especially post 9/11, we basically militarized them.
So those are my
Sachs,
ideas.
what are your ideas around policing and how we should change it? You've heard Chamath's.
I don't have more detailed ideas than Chamath. I think he's given some good ones, for sure. I mean, I think we definitely need better training, and I think better oversight over the use of force. The body cam idea, Jason, I've seen you tweet about. I think that's pretty interesting too. I think
I'll
you're
just
right.
Explain that for a minute. The body cam idea I had was I asked, does anybody know, and does Black Lives Matter or another organization track which police departments, because we could get a list of every police department that exists in some database somewhere. Do we actually know what percentage actually have body cams and what model they use and what percentage are working? Because one of the things that I think has happened this year is, the live streaming and the live video and the number of smartphones out there has resulted in us being able to see what Black and brown people have been telling us for decades, which is they're murdered by cops. And now we get to see it. And when you see George Floyd get murdered, it's fairly obvious that that's what happened. We don't have a video, or they have the video of Breonna Taylor getting murdered. So that's from a cop body cam. So I was thinking we should just start with that as a basic, which is every single cop car should have a 360 camera in every cop. It should be a federal mandate. And I don't exactly know how federal mandates work, Sachs, but don't you think there should be a federal mandate for just cameras and car cameras?
I think it's a good idea. I think the use of cameras is a good idea. I mean, maybe not recording the police officers when they're sitting in their car, but every time there's like a call, they pull somebody over, sort of, like Fourth Amendment type search and seizure type situation. Yeah, I think it would make sense to have that on video. Why not?
Yeah, and I mean, I think you got to think every police will behave better. Go ahead, Freeberg.
There was a case the other day. A young guy, I think he was 19 years old, was shot in D.C. named Deon Kay. I don't know if any of you guys watched the body cam footage.
No.
And so he was a 19-year-old Black man. He was shot. He died. But in the body cam footage, you can see that he pulls out this gun and throws it. And when he pulls out the gun and flings his hand around, he's got the gun in his hand. That's when the cop shot him. And so there was about 100 protesters that showed up, but it's largely become a non-story as a result of the facts associated with the body cam footage. But I just want to propose something else that's a little bit more radical. Maybe my libertarian ideals kind of cross with my socialist ideals and forming this concept, but perhaps
you're a socialist?
No, I don't know. I've never been accused of that. But
no.
If we trace back, these systems are really chaotic. Everything you're talking about is layers and layers of bureaucracy and ideas and shit we should do to manage the problem. But there is kind of one common, butterfly effect, butterflies at the source of all of a lot of what we're talking about, which is guns. If there weren't any guns in the United States, I would not feel threatened as a police officer. I would never have any reason to feel threatened, and I would never have any reason to pull a gun. The reason I always make to pull a gun as a police officer is my life is threatened. And in the absence of firearms, I have no right to pull a gun. And that's the case in like the UK, for example, where there are like no police officer shootings of civilians because they're never under threat of being killed by a gun. So there's a simple answer, which is get rid of the guns, but, a little too controversial and obviously many layers to that argument, especially from kind of both sides. But I would say, much of what's going to go on now and in the future is just chaos theory. It's going to be building more layers of complexity. It's more entropy. It's more kind of associated complexity to try and resolve the underlying problem of all of this, which is that we've got guns on the streets. We've got guns in people's hands. And therefore, there's always this threat against every individual that their life might be taken by another.
Well, let me make a prediction right now. There's not going to be any new gun control legislation for a generation. Because of the looting and rioting that's going on, gun sales are at an all-time high. I mean, every single gun store that
ammunition
you go
is
to,
sold out, right?
you can't get guns, you can't get ammo, and there are more first-time gun buyers in the United States for the last several months than there's ever been. I mean, the ranks of the NRA must just be swelling right now. And so this idea that you're going to get gun reform, I don't think it's going to happen. People aren't going to support it. And, I think, you use the word, I think, idealistic. I mean, I think it's like a little bit naive to assume that you're going to be able to get rid of all the guns in the hands of bad actors. There are a lot of people in this country who feel the need to have a gun to protect themselves. The cops can't always get there quickly enough. And a lot of people feel the need to have that for self-defense.
I also think the minimum amount of training for a police officer should not be 6 months. I think they have to if we really want to have the society move forward and, to solve our issue of race, which is, like the original sin of America, we're going to really need to start thinking about making, police go back to school for 18 months, 12 months and rethink how we address this situation, because it's just tragically unfair that one group of people's children has to worry when they're driving in a car, and other people on this call don't have to worry, right? And that is just crazy. Let's take a hard shift to the economy, and then we'll go into the election. What do you think, Chamath? You've been talking a little bit about the economy.